Picture this. You're a Metroid fan in the year 2002, and there hasn't been a single new game for the past 8 years. You're tired, sad, and on your 14th run of Super Metroid. That is until the fateful day of November 18th, where Nintendo drops not only one, but 2 Metroid games. A new 3D spin-off called Metroid Prime on GameCube, and the long-awaited sequel to Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion on Game Boy Advance. Sure, the release of these games were already big deals back in 2002, but back then, we didn't know how big of a deal they would remain for the next 2 decades. Of course, Metroid Prime would leave a lasting legacy as one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time, but Metroid Fusion was something different. On the surface, this looks like yet another 2D game like Super Metroid, not really propelling gaming forward with mind-blowing graphics and revolutionary first-person gameplay. That didn't stop Metroid fans from enjoying it, but little did they know that this would be the end of the line for the 2D Metroid timeline for nearly 20 years, with only a couple of 2D remakes to fill the gap. In that sense, Metroid Fusion's importance has only grown in that time, as it was the closest thing we had to an end for Samus and the Metroids. At least until Metroid Dread finally launches in a couple of months. So in order to celebrate that and Metroid's 35th anniversary, we're going to look back and analyze Metroid Fusion to see where it stands out amongst the other 2D Metroids and other games in the Metroidvania genre. We'll even see if there are elements from Fusion that Dread can expand upon or eliminate entirely. However, we're not going to go into too many details about the story, so if you're looking for a recap of sorts, check out our video on the Metroid story so far. That said, there will still be spoilers of the game's bosses and environments, so if you're planning to play it before Dread comes out, stop this video and go play it now. In fact, it would behoove you to play Fusion before Dread. Not only is it set right before Metroid Dread, but a great amount of story elements from Fusion make their way into Dread, notably the X-parasite, which is the primary antagonist. What the X-parasite does is attach itself to a host, kills said host, and then morphs into a copy of that host. This means that a twisted clone of Samus exists, and it's called the SAX. More on this creature later. This parasite has taken over a research vessel, killing just about every scientist and creature aboard. After receiving a vaccine for the parasite using Metroid DNA, Samus is immune to the X and is sent on a mission to wipe them out from the station. The setting is one of the most interesting parts of Metroid Fusion, as it doesn't take place on a planet like previous games, and even Metroid Prime. It's set entirely on the man-made research station. Blasphemy! How can you set a Metroid game on anything other than a planet? Well, this station is a research vessel meant to study organic life, so the station's sectors are meant to house these creatures. Sector 1, for example, is meant to simulate the ecosystem of planet SR388, so naturally, you'll run into some very familiar enemies like the Hornodes. Sector 2 is a more tropical area, Sector 3 is high temperature, Sector 4 is aquatic, Sector 5 is low temperature, and Sector 6 is just dark. So while you might not be exploring an actual planet in Metroid Fusion, the BSL station is a great simulation of one, though admittedly, it still feels like a station. There are a lot more metallic structures in each area compared to other Metroid games, and there is a main deck that serves as a hub connecting each sector through a series of elevators. The hub doesn't make Metroid Fusion feel like a Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie game though. You'll be jumping between sectors throughout the game, revisiting them to complete story-based objectives. This isn't like later Metroid games such as Metroid Prime 2 and 3, where each area had a main objective to complete, and when it was done, you could leave the area and not have to come back to it if you preferred, only occasionally to pick up things like energy cells and floating keys. Instead, Metroid Fusion's map structure, despite having a hub area, still behaves much like Super Metroid and Metroid Prime, where you'll revisit these sectors quite often for important reasons. And the best part, backtracking is made way easier thanks to the hub sector. No longer will you have to run across the entire map to get to an objective or find an item pickup. It's as simple as taking an elevator, walking a few yards, and taking another one. It just works. The entrance to each sector contains a navigation room, save station, and recharge station for missiles and health. You'll never go into a new section unprepared unless you purposefully skip saving and recharging. The navigation rooms are a different story, however, as this is where you'll communicate with the ship's computer Adam, who guides you throughout the mission via waypoint markers placed on the map, which is similar to Metroid Prime's hint system. This is where Metroid Fusion is a more linear game than most Metroid titles, but I don't think linear is a fair term to describe it. Even though Adam points you where to go, he doesn't tell you how to get there, although it usually isn't too complicated since you always download a map every time you enter a new sector. In that sense, Metroid Fusion is a more guided experience, but that isn't to say you won't get lost at all. The map doesn't always show everything, as the game will often throw curveballs along the designated path, creating blockades that force you to find new hidden paths leading to sections not previously shown on the map. I like this curveball throwing method of showing what you think is the full map until you find these new areas. It's a way to keep players guessing what happens next. It also makes revisiting areas feel way less repetitive, since it always gives you something new to explore. Metroid Other M, which came later, also had a similar setting with the Bottle Ship, another research station, but it wasn't as interesting as the one in Fusion. This is because the Bottle Ship didn't try hiding the fact that it was indeed a research station with a lot more metallic structures and rooms instead of organic, planet-like areas. Now there are these man-made rooms in Fusion, sure, but there are far more organic rooms filled with grass, water, and sand. Plus, the pixel art and more abstract 2D level design of Metroid Fusion help mask the station part of the vessel, allowing some areas to look more like actual planets, at least from the player's perspective. It's a much easier illusion to pull off in 2D rather than 3D, and there's something about Game Boy Advance graphics that still make me a happy lad in 2021, and Metroid Fusion still looks great even nearly 2 decades later. The guided exploration of Metroid Fusion was something new to the 2D franchise, as the last 3 games rarely gave as much of a hint as where to go, leaving the player to figure it out. This more mission-like structure was probably in response to complaints that Metroid games didn't give a clear sense of direction. One downside, though, is that it takes away from the isolated feel Metroid games have been known for, as you'll constantly be communicating with Adam throughout the mission. The music also doesn't have that subtle, creepy tone like the soundtrack from Super Metroid, which really helped add to the lonely atmosphere of that game. Although there is one track in Fusion that does capture that feel, and it's when you're hiding from the SAX. So while there are some genuinely creepy moments in Metroid Fusion, it's hard to feel hopelessly isolated when you have Adam at your side. It's rare for Metroid games to have companions for Samus, and while Adam does detract from the franchise's isolating nature, he is a well-written character. Technically he's just a computer, but Samus named him after her deceased CO, Adam Malkovich. He's essentially the game's conduit to the story, informing Samus of what's happening and even having orders of his own to follow that he can't tell her. Later on, you start to wonder if you can even trust Adam, but he then proves himself to be a worthy ally by the end. So yeah, it's unfortunate that the inclusion of Adam came at the cost of Metroid's noteworthy atmosphere, but he helps make the story a lot more intriguing. And the best part? He doesn't interrupt the game every chance he gets. In fact, Computer Adam is actually a better character than his human counterpart we meet in Metroid Other M. In Fusion, Samus described Adam as a person with respect and compassion, which was nothing like the Adam we met in Other M, who was a bitter and resentful jerk. If anything, he made Computer Adam a more likable character, and it's a relief we're going to see more of him again in Metroid Dread. Let's talk gameplay. Even though this is a more guided Metroid game, there are a few puzzle solutions that are overly cryptic. We could talk about this infamous room where you had to bomb a certain section of the floor to raise a platform, but the worst offender is when there are invisible pathways obstructed by walls. I was very confused during this moment in particular, where I had to get through this underwater maze, only to discover that there's an invisible pathway completely covered up. Are you kidding me? Fortunately, there aren't a lot of these cryptic hints scattered throughout the game, and I doubt there will be any more of them in future 2D Metroids. Hopefully. So in order to complete her mission, Samus must take orders from her computerized CO as he informs her of everything going on in the facility and points her to objectives as well as her lost gear. Normally in Metroid games and Metroidvanias in general, you happen to stumble upon new gear and power-ups in a more natural fashion, guided by your own pathway instead of an objective marker. Nowadays, there are still Metroidvanias that have objective markers, but they don't often tell you what power you're about to acquire like Adam does. It kind of ruins the surprise, but at least it doesn't ruin the excitement of finally getting that new tool or weapon. Thankfully, Adam doesn't always tell you what power you're about to get, as you'll occasionally encounter bosses that will reward you with a new power-up upon completion. What's interesting is that every boss and enemy in this game is an X-parasite. Every time you kill a creature, the X-parasite will emerge from its body and float around until you collect it. Given that the vaccine has made Samus immune to the parasite, it will instead replenish her health, ammo, or both. Unfortunately, this also makes her vulnerable to extreme cold, a weakness the Metroids also share, so until she acquires the Varia suit, she'll be unable to enter cold areas. There's even a blue X-parasite that appears later on that will damage and temporarily freeze Samus until she gets the Varia suit. The most dangerous X-parasites though are the big ones that form into giant bosses. While some bosses require you to spam missiles at them, there are a few that require some tact. Zazabi, for example, can only be attacked from underneath, so you have to get under it while it floats down to shoot it. Then there is Ceres, who moves wicked fast under and above water. You have to anticipate its movements in order to shoot its head. Unrelated, I will change my name on Twitter to Joey Ceres if this video gets 1 like. Make it happen, people. After enough hits, each boss will lose their creature form and turn back into a floating X-parasite, to which you'll have to shoot off their protective armor to absorb them, rewarding you with a new ability. This applies to just about every boss in the game, and fortunately, Metroid Fusion has some pretty tight and responsive controls to fight them with. Playing it right after Super Metroid, you can definitely feel the improvements, notably that a wall jump isn't that complicated to pull off. Samus is also faster and less floaty than in Super Metroid, which is a welcome change. The later bosses get much more difficult to the point where I regretted not increasing my health. One of these villains is a giant spider called Yakuza, who grabs you with his talons and sucks your health dry until he body slams you. You might die a few times before you figure out that his open mouth is a weak point for missiles. Let's not forget about Neo Ridley though, the X-parasite's haunting version of Ridley who died in Super Metroid. Or was it Other M? I don't know anymore. This freak of nature has a terrifying scream that you just do not anticipate one bit. Other than that, this is a typical Ridley fight that you bombard with missiles. Still fun though. Metroid Fusion has some of the most creative bosses in the 2D franchise, and even though a few of them were frustrating, I never found a boss battle to be unfair, but I almost did with Nightmare. Oh yeah, I forgot about Nightmare. I tried to forget about Nightmare, because what is this thing? This is without a doubt the freakiest enemy in all of Metroid. It's a biomechanical experiment created by the Galactic Federation designed to manipulate gravity. Well, could they have at least made something that wouldn't scar us all for life? This is the boss I died the most on, and that's because I forgot about its attack patterns, where you have to first jump to get him to fly higher, leaving his weak spot at the bottom open for attack. And then when he slowly closes in on you, attach yourself to the wall above and keep shooting at his face until he gets close. It takes a few tries, so don't be afraid to use those restore points. Oh come on, I'm an adult, I don't have time for this. Honestly though, Nightmare isn't the only scary thing about Metroid Fusion. In fact, Metroid Fusion is arguably the most scary game in the series, while also not being that scary. It's really interesting because upon looking at it, it's a bright and colorful Game Boy Advance title with some upbeat music playing in the background most of the time. There's even a mission where you save these adorable creatures from planet Zebes that appeared in Super Metroid, so it's not exactly a horror game. And yet, the game's primary antagonist is a parasite that kills its hosts and takes their form right after their symbiotic connection. And that's not all, they can even download weapon data organically and also receive memories of their hosts. This was discovered when a parasite took the form of a dead scientist who had access to the facility's self-destruct function. You know what that means? They can even take the form of the most skilled bounty hunter in the galaxy. This is the SAX, an X-parasite version of Samus containing all her weapons, armor, and skills. All that's missing is a conscience. There are a few segments where the SAX appears, and all Samus can do is run or hide from it, as it is way too powerful to take on without being fully equipped. And let me tell you, whenever this menace appears on screen, it's bone-chilling. You cannot move a muscle, and if you do, it's game over. If you're already in a good hiding spot, stay there until it leaves. Thankfully, the SAX isn't like Mr. X in Resident Evil 2, save for the X in the names, as it only appears during scripted parts of the game. You'll already be in a hiding spot when it shows up, but there are moments where you will run into it, and you have to get far away from it as possible to find another hiding spot. It's really tense, especially if you forgot to save your progress. Thank you, restore points. The SAX gives Metroid Fusion a sense of dread, and I'm well aware I used the word dread. The Emmy robots in Metroid Dread seem to be heavily inspired by the SAX, causing players tension and panic whenever they're in one of their zones. Definitely a concept that was birthed by the SAX, and to think producer Yoshio Sakamoto wanted to execute this idea for the past 19 years. If there's anything Metroid Dread can take from Fusion, it's the horror aspect. It doesn't necessarily have to have bosses like Nightmare and Neo Ridley, but there should be moments that keep you on the edge of your seat. And it looks like the Emmy are the robots that'll do it. I could already tell from the first trailer that the Emmy are going to behave similarly to the SAX, being completely invincible with your only line of defense being running or hiding. And to think there's evidently going to be 7 of these robots throughout the entire game. At least you'll be able to kill them at some point. That said, if there is one thing Metroid Dread shouldn't take from Fusion, it's the exploration guided by Adam. Thankfully, this appears to be the case, because even though Adam returns in Dread, he only provides hints whenever you speak to him, not objective markers. It might still make the experience less lonely, but at least you'll get the chance to figure out where to go instead of it being laid out to you. Now you're probably thinking I have a vendetta against Adam for ruining the Metroid experience or something. Well, here's the thing. I don't have a problem with Adam or the guided nature of Metroid Fusion, because ultimately, it still feels like a Metroid game. You still get to explore new and dangerous locations, fight wild and scary bosses, and collect new gear and power-ups to end the game as the ultimate bounty hunter. In the end, Metroid Fusion is a great game worth replaying in 2021, especially before Dread releases, and I like it a lot. It's a game that stands out amongst the other 2D Metroids by providing an engaging narrative, a unique setting, and a dreadful atmosphere, at least until Dread comes out. However, there are some drawbacks, namely in the guided exploration. It doesn't make the game linear, but it definitely changes the atmosphere we've come to expect from Metroid. Still, this was a necessary change to get more people to play Metroid Fusion. People who were probably frustrated by Super Metroid's cryptic level design. While the guided exploration takes a bit away from the isolating nature of Metroid, the gameplay is still classic Metroidvania action. There are many who consider Fusion to be the best 2D Metroid, and they have perfectly valid reasons as to why. I still recommend playing it before Metroid Dread, as I suspect the story will feel much more impactful after experiencing the story in Fusion. Will the X-parasite return? Are the Metroids really extinct? All might be revealed on October 8th. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this retro review of Metroid Fusion here on GameXplain. Let me know what you think of the game in the comments below, and check out the videos on the right for more topics that you might be interested in. Until next time, bye, Metroid Dread.